All right. Yeah, welcome back after lunch. Hope you're ready for probably the most challenging talk I've ever given. It's been a topic that has kept me busy for 6 to 9 months, maybe. You know, there were a few breaks, so it's not every day, it's full, but it was a lot. Just getting to know the topic, kind of trying to understand all the ins and outs and how to make Hyvä compatible and compliant without losing what makes it Hyvä. Right? It's been some work. So this is what we've got. Let's take a look. So first question is, why should we care? By now, I guess almost everybody here has heard about the upcoming change. PCI DSS standard 4 is coming into full effect on April 1st. No joke. And that's basically the main reason for all this work. Because most merchants probably wouldn't even care, except if they get hacked, they're in for a world of trouble. Since they not only get all the reputational damage to their customers and their business in that regard, but also the organization behind PCI DSS will fine them money until they kind of become proper compliant. And also, they will have to, in order to become compliant, they will have to go through an assessment process, which also they have to pay for. So it's bloody expensive. So it's very expensive to have a security breach if you're not compliant. So how does a merchant become compliant? The good news is almost all merchants are fine, the grand majority, if they just go through the self-assessment questionnaire. That's the lowest level of compliance, and they should be fine. That has been that way in the past. There are some exceptions, so larger merchants might have to get an external assessment. It depends on the history of the merchant, so if they maybe previously had a security breach. But I guess the main reason is if they have a very large number of transactions. So the really big merchants, it's different. Or after a merchant got hacked, they have to go through this process too. And that process has to be done by a qualified security assessor or a QSA, and the merchant has to pay for it. So yeah, again, expensive stuff. So it's probably a good idea for merchants to be compliant proactively before they get hacked. That way, the whole process is much less painful. If they can show, okay, I went through the self-assessment questionnaire, answered all the questions, followed all the recommendations, I was compliant, I still got hacked, they won't get fined. Better story. So, how does that affect us? The main section that applies to us as developers is section 6 here in PCI DSS 4.0. And what it says is all payment page scripts that are loaded and executed in the consumer's browsers are managed as follows, right? And there are a couple of things in this paragraph here that I want to unpack a little bit, so we know what's coming for us. What's the work we have to accomplish. First of all, this little term. There are payment page scripts. So what is a payment page? Is it the checkout? Yeah, I guess so, right? I mean, that's where you enter your payment details usually. But what about those in-context payment buttons, right, on the cart page? Does that make the cart page a payment page? Or on the product detail page, right? The pay later banner, PayPal module, for example. Or in the mini cart. What about these things? In the mini cart, that's on pretty much every page. So is the full site a payment page, every page in the catalog? So yeah. Thankfully, the self-assessment questionnaire clarifies this a little bit. So actually, there are no specific questions to this 643 section in the self-assessment questionnaire, but it does say that all of section 6, requirement 6, applies to merchant servers with a web page that either redirects customers from the merchant page to a payment processor or embed a payment processor's form in, like a payment form or an embedded web page in an iframe. And that's the change. We have had PCI DSS for many, many years, I don't know, 10, 20 years. But the difference now is previously, it was enough as long as the payment processor was strictly compliant and everything, it was fine. The merchant was compliant. Now, the page linking to the merchant basically also has to be compliant to the payment processor. That's the big change. And why did this change? Like, why did they make this change? The reason is that nowadays, most card skimming doesn't happen like it used to. Like, who remembers MageCard, the original? Oh, yeah, okay. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears here. Anyway, back then, card skimming usually happened that some JavaScript was injected into the page, and when a form was rendered on the Magento store, then of course, the input was intercepted and the data was sent to the hacker. Nowadays, what happens is the customer clicks the redirect button, and then they get redirected to a site that looks exactly like the real payment site, but it's actually not the payment provider, it's the hacker servers. And the customer enters their credit card details. It's really hard to detect in most cases. And then after they do that, they get redirected back to the real payment processor. So chances are customers won't even notice. And that's why now, in order to make it harder for hackers to change the target when the customer says pay, that's why this restriction is now being applied. Okay, so payment pages. Good. We'll talk a bit more about that soon. Now, what do we have to do with these payment pages? Basically, we have to ensure that a method is implemented to confirm that every script on the page is authorized and every script on the page, the integrity is not compromised. And that's where content security policies come into play. This is a technology, it's a protocol implemented in the browsers, it's built on top of HTTP. It's basically HTTP headers that are being sent along with the web page, and in the header, the browser receives instructions what's allowed on a page. And it doesn't only cover scripts, but that's what affects us the most. I won't be talking a lot about external scripts here. Right? So anything loaded from Google Tag Manager or from whatever tracking provider and so on. That's stuff that's in Magento authorized by providing the host name, possibly with a wildcard. And that's basically how Magento does it. And it's like, okay, anything from this domain should be okay, so we'll just trust it, and that's good for enough. Now, I guess I haven't looked into that deeply. It could be made more secure by actually specifying a SHA of that external script, and then that would be much better and secure, but that would break everything, because then payment provider couldn't update anything anymore without breaking pages. So it's unrealistic to go full security there, right? But okay, fine. The question remains, what do we have to do to be compliant? Because we want to have scripts on the page. We're not just using a plain HTML form. Well, we will provide, let's say, variations or products that allow a merchant or you to implement full compatibility. Let's say compatibility with CSP. It's sometimes hard, you have to be compliant, PCI compliant or CSP compatible, and so yeah, sometimes I confuse myself. Sorry. Anyway, so what have we got? We have Hyvä Checkout CSP. For a while, we'll have both versions of Hyvä Checkout, the CSP compatible one and the regular one that you know, but that's only for a transition period. We expect to stop adding new features to the traditional one, simply because of PCI DSS. It doesn't make sense to have a checkout that's not PCI compatible. Then we also have a CSP in-context payments module. What that does is it's a module that renders iframes instead of the payment buttons, in-context payment buttons, right? And in the iframe, the size of the iframe is the exact size of the button, And inside of the iframe, we render a page from Magento, and that page then renders the actual payment button and nothing else. And that page is fully CSP compliant. So that's a workaround to allow serving payment buttons from a page that's fully CSP compliant without having everything around it to be CSP compliant. And we intend this module to be a basis that other payment providers and such can use to implement their own in-context payment buttons. So far, we've just done that for the PayPal buttons. That's part of Magento out of the box everywhere. But we want to help all payment providers follow this example and also do the same for all the others. And then finally, we also have a version of Hyvä, of the theme, which is CSP compatible, fully, 100%. And we don't actually expect most merchants to use that. But people who want to can. I actually rather expect people to look at it and say, okay, well, what's necessary to make this component CSP compatible and such, right? And then maybe just take parts of it. And we are planning to maintain both variations of the theme. We'll have the regular theme, because it's actually nicer to work with, and we have the CSP version of the theme. Okay, so let's get a bit more concrete, okay? What does it mean in everyday work as a developer? Well, it means that the script source policy or group of policies in the CSP content security policy header, 3 policies must not be present: unsafe inline, unsafe eval, and unsafe hashes. That's basically what this requirement there means. That has to be gone. So what does that mean for us? So first of all, if we don't have unsafe inline, it means we can't just add a script to a page. Our browser won't execute it. Instead, we have to let the browser know you may run this script. And the way we solved this problem, it was actually the easiest one to fix here, is we added a new template variable called a Hyvä CSP. And what you want to do is, after every script tag, you'll add one line, register inline script, and that's it. And what it does, it looks at the output buffer and extracts the script, calculates the SHA for the script, and then it can be added to the header, to the content security policy header, if it's a cached page in the full page cache, or if it's an uncached page, it will inject a nonce into the script tag, which will also allow the browser to run it. Now, we can't use a nonce everywhere, because nonces have to be unique on every request, and that's why they can't be used on cached pages. Okay, so that's how we do this authorization of scripts. It also means we can't inject scripts into the page. So for example, if we have an Alpine template tag, anything inside of the template tag is not part of the DOM, technically. It's just the browser ignores it until Alpine takes it and injects it into the DOM. So if we have a script tag in there, it doesn't work anymore. So in our templates, we have to ensure any JavaScript is outside of the template tags. That's probably the biggest change for us as developers, the most work, just moving those scripts outside of those Alpine template tags. And then the browser sees them on page load, they get authorized, everything's fine. Okay, let's have a look at unsafe eval. If that policy isn't present, what does that mean? That means we have to use Alpine CSP, which is a special build of Alpine which doesn't use unsafe eval, right? A lot of the nice features that Alpine has, that we can write JavaScript expressions in the attributes, we can't do that with Alpine 3. Oh yeah, which Alpine version is loaded into the theme depends on if unsafe eval is present or not. So if a page has unsafe eval, it loads the regular Alpine version. If we exclude unsafe eval, it automatically switches to the CSP version, because the regular one wouldn't work anyway, right? So that happens automatically. And then we have to update our view models, because what happens, Alpine CSP basically doesn't do evaluation of attributes anymore. The only thing that works is everything in an Alpine attribute is used as a lookup on an object, as an object property key, and then it does whatever that is in that thing. If it's a function, it executes it, for example, right? If it's a value, that's the return value. But we can't do anything else. And that starts with those constructor functions. So for example, xData, right? We can't specify a method name because it won't get executed. Instead, we have to use Alpine data to register a function. Now we could directly specify the function here inline, right? We wouldn't have to declare it as a window function, but we still do that because that allows proxying the function, extending it, overriding it. So that's an extension mechanism. So you can customize JavaScript in Hyvä without actually needing to override the template. But that's all documented. That's nothing new. But that's why we keep doing that. You know, we add the function as a normal object in the window scope, and then we just register that with Alpine init. Right. One side effect of not being able to call functions is we can't pass arguments along. The workaround is to use data attributes, right? So instead of using whatever, you know, registering, yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious. Okay, that's the whole thing. Most of this isn't hard. It's just a bit different. It's more the amount of work rather than that it's complicated. Okay, and then we can easily access it through this $element and get it through the regular Alpine mechanism. All right. Another thing that's handy, doesn't work, is xModel. So we have to work around that too by using a event observer to update the value and then render the value back with a value attribute binding. Finally, we don't have unsafe hashes. This is probably the most minimal impact for us. I'm just adding that because Luma checkout actually still requires this, but we don't. So, you know, as a merchant, you're much more secure if you use Hyvä. Anyway, what that basically means, we can't use inline event listeners on objects like onClick, onLoad, etc. Everything has to be done through a JavaScript tag. Okay, that's basically what has to be done to be Alpine CSP compatible. So what's the current state of things? We already published the dev docs. There's a CSP section in the checkout dev docs, as well as the theme dev docs, and there's a lot of information there. That's live right now. You can see a little banner at the top that this hasn't been published yet, but you can already look at the docs. We have started something like an early tech preview for some people, like as a little beta to gather some more feedback that's currently running. So from our side, it's actually pretty much done, and we expect to release this very soon in the form of a release candidate, first of all, but general availability, and then maybe a week later, depending on the feedback we get, it'll be fully available. There's still one thing we want to fix in the in-context payment buttons, but yeah, that's coming soon. So next step to get ready means check out the docs. That's there right now. Have a look, see what your takeaway from there is. And then, of course, prioritize the checkout compatibility. And that's for merchants, for agencies that are managing their merchants, and for any extension vendors, anything you want to keep working in the checkout, that should be the first thing to look at, right? That's the most important part. And because it's MageWire that dynamically injects HTML into the page, the biggest change there is also that the scripts have to be moved into a separate template, so they're already present when the checkout initially loads. Because we can't inject scripts dynamically anymore, okay? So yeah, that's the biggest part of the work there. The next thing to be aware of is that if you have components that are on the checkout and in the regular theme, those will have to be made CSP compatible. In the default Hyvä theme, that's the messages component, that's the authentication drawer, the authentication pop-up template, and that's the newsletter form in the footer. There might be more. If you have extensions or customizations, then those need to be compatible too. Thankfully, any Alpine component that's CSP compatible will always also work in regular Alpine because it's just a subset, basically, right? So, okay. The next thing to look at is if you're using in-context payment buttons, try to make them, compatible with this in-context payment buttons module. And then you should be good. Most merchants should be fine, at least if they only require to go through the self-assessment questionnaire. For larger merchants, then of course it depends on the assessor they're using, like if really large. Okay. I also would like to suggest you start creating new components already being CSP compatible. Because yeah, then it works with any version of Alpine, and yeah, it's probably the simplest way forward. Okay, and that's pretty much it. I'm really looking forward to any kind of thoughts, feedbacks, question of all of you. I'm very happy to show you code if you want to. So I don't know, how much time is there still? There should be maybe a few minutes left, right? 5 minutes? Perfect. So I'll try to switch to PHP Storm if I can. Or not. Nope. Okay. Sadly, that doesn't work. Okay, fine. Find me later, I'll show you. Or if you have questions now, please go ahead and shoot.
Oh, here we go. Simon, I'll come to you next.
Very good. Okay. I can't see you, so I don't know if there are any hands. Ah.
So, if I understand it correctly, there will be two repositories of the two main Hyvä repositories, one CSP one and one non-CSP one? Or?
It's probably one repo. You mean for the theme?
Yeah.
Yes, it'd probably be the same repo, just a different branch.
Okay.
It's still very similar, right? And we'll be maintaining both, so it's easier if it's in the same repo.
Yeah. So let's say you're developing a completely new Hyvä project, and you don't want to enable CSP on the regular theme, but you don't even want it in the checkout. Yeah. Would you then say just use the CSP compatible version of Hyvä theme everywhere and just disable it in the front end? Does that make sense?
You could do that. That would work. It does work. I mean, tested that. But I don't know, maybe it's easier later on, because who knows, maybe PCI DSS 5.0 coming into effect 2027 might require strict CSP compatibility all everywhere. Who knows? But otherwise, if you want to favor what you want more developer just want to be able to write JavaScript in the attributes as always, use a regular theme and just use the CSP checkout. Yeah. My guess is honestly, most people will still continue to use the regular theme.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see. And from a packaging perspective, by the way, just one note, will be, it'll have a different package name, but it will compose or provide the regular version of the theme. The theme module will always be for both. So we'll only have one version of the theme module. It's just a theme that will have two different flavors. Okay, Simon.
Yes, so is there any performance footprint of the CSP version? Did you measure something, especially regarding this register inline script stuff?
Yeah. It's from main thread processing time, it's actually a little bit faster. I don't know why. Maybe because it has to create less function objects or anything. But sadly, the CSP Alpine build currently also, it uses a different evaluator, and the evaluator is teeny compared to the normal one, which is like 400, 500 lines, and that one is maybe 15 lines. But the build, technically, the JavaScript for the regular evaluator is still inside of the JavaScript file of Alpine CSP, even though it's not used. But Jeroen has just opened a merge request to Alpine, so we can get a smaller build there too. So it should be actually more lightweight, interestingly enough. But again, that's really micro-optimization. I don't think that should be the deciding factor. More question back there. I don't see who it is, but... yeah, you are.
Hi there. Oh, hi there. So assuming you've got like a report URI going back so you can keep track of all the violations and stuff, what's the mechanism for updating the allow list as new things come through? Do we have to deploy code, or is there an admin panel interface or a sync or some kind?
So first of all, reporting has been in Magento for quite some time. That's no change from our side. You can use Sunsec or whatever else you use there. So that's not actually anything we touched, right? That's in there by default. Personally, I would recommend Sunsec, but you know, I don't even know exactly what other good providers there are. I've heard New Relic does something, but anyway, your other question regarding the allow list, that's another thing we haven't actually changed. We're just going with default Magento there. In default Magento, that is managed through in the CSP whitelist XML files that the model can add, and that's actually the most sane approach, I believe, because that way what domains are allowed can be, let's say, you know, frozen. Without a code change, it's impossible to add or remove them, which is much more secure. If you put them into the database and add them to the header, of course, technically not a big problem, but as a hacker, if I'm able to inject something into the database, and that's the main attack vector we're trying to prevent with CSP, right? Then what's stopping the hacker from adding his domain to the table too, right? So I doubt it that the security assessor would like that approach. That said, I know, Marek, you were talking about that earlier. There are some third-party service providers that currently are unable to provide somebody with a full list of domains. I think they will need to change their business because it's impossible currently to be PCI DSS 4.0 compliant and use them. It just doesn't work. So if your merchant wants to be compliant, they can't use them. I don't see how, sadly, right? It would mean completely effectively disabling that authentication mechanism in CSP.
If you are using the theme as CSP, can you use Hyvä UI components?
Yeah, I mean, currently the Hyvä UI components are not yet all up to date. We've started working new components as building them being CSP compatible, but that will be the very next thing that we'll do, right? Update all the components to be CSP compatible. Now we've kind of locked down our approach. Now we know what to do, right? That's been the last couple of months, and now it's a matter of rolling that out everywhere. The same goes for enterprise, Hyvä Enterprise, and so on. So yeah, you definitely will be able to use Hyvä UI. Yeah, I think it'll actually happen pretty quickly. Okay, there's another question over here.
I think this will be the last question.
Yeah, please find me later. I'm happy to finally have people to talk to about this. It's like,
I'll try to be quick then. I'll try to be quick. One of the other rules, as far as I know from the requirements, is that you cannot keep different scripts on the payment page than to process the payment. And maybe this is not really the question to how you want to manage that in Hyvä, because it's not the case. But as you probably study for the last 6 months, all these rules and everything, is this changing really how merchants will measure the checkout? Because technically they cannot have any more scripts for measuring or anything on the pages where they accept payments.
No, I don't think that's true. They can have scripts on payment pages, absolutely. Those scripts just have to be authenticated and the integrity has to be assured. Okay. So, yeah.
I will try find the one I'm mentioning and we will try to confront it.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I believe that to be a false statement. And there are many, because it's not very clear the way the new rules are written, and we still have to play by them. Yeah. Evil people might say that's on purpose, you know, because then they can always blame the merchant and fine them if something happens. So, yeah. Anyway, that's it.
Bro,
that's all I got.
Thank you so much, Vinai.